So welcome. Just to get one or two of the brief formalities out of the way. What we have here today is in the long planned for symposium is one of the fruits of the extended project that we've been doing now for 18 months or so, funded by the the Polish National Centre for Sciences, into negotiating cultural difference. I've written this out now about 500 times. What does it say? Negotiating cultural difference in the digital era. So that's why we're here. This is one of the main fruits or requirements of our activities. I am the manager for my sins, the manager of this project. So that's why I'm here doing this. I would like just to say a couple of things before we get started. One is to thank our team. In the session after Professor Bauman has spoken, you will have arrayed before you here at the front of the room our team, our academic, organisational, kind of six-person team. We've all been working very hard on this, which I suppose goes without saying, and I would like to thank everybody for their labours, for their hard work, in particular in the last weeks and months for Roger Zahara and Yola Bartizel for their very strenuous organisational efforts. So thanks for everybody, but I would like to make a note of that. I don't have much else to say really, because we want to get, I think, to the sort of meat, so to speak, of what we are here to do. In a moment I will just do a couple more things really. In a moment Agnieszka Stasiewicz will make a comment to say something to you about the presence of the cameras. Then the Vice Rector Kishrin will, as I have said, open proceedings in a formal sense. And then we will hear from Professor Bauman, who I'm sure I speak for everybody from the university, when I say that we are very warmly welcome him to our common room today. We are very happy and excited to have him here. I, as much as anybody, as a sociologist and somebody who has been reading his books now, really reading his works for 20 or 25 years, it's a very happy day for me, and I'm sure many others will be able to listen to him speak to us. I won't go into a long account of his career, which I think is not required or necessary, only to say this, that for me, as somebody who is very interested, both as a professional academic level, in what is happening to us as we shift more and more of our interactions and culture onto remote platforms, is also is kind of underpinned by a much more personal, human interest in the kind of work that, as somebody who is the father of digital natives, for example, trying to figure out what on earth they are doing, why they are doing it, and what the consequences might be. I look to Professor Bauman's work over the years, not only for social theory, the highest calibre, but also for, and this is something which I think is not always present in the speculations of social theorists, the human dimension of the kind of human dimension of what these social theories reveal, the human dimensions and consequences. So I'm looking forward to hearing Professor Bauman speak today, because I think of the people one can read and listen to in this kind of area, this combination of social theoretical nuance and a concern for what is happening to people, a real kind of humanistic concern for what the consequences are for people of this, living in this kind of bewildering sort of time, are what I think a lot of us most prize in Professor Bauman's work. So before we get to that, and before I ask Vice Rector Kishrin to say a few words, Agnieszka is going to tell you or say something about the presence of the camera.
Yes. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We are very happy to have you here. I have one announcement regarding the cameras. We would love to record your talks. If you object to that, just let us know. All the cameras will be switched off. We do not intend to use it in any way without your permission. So if we would like to put it up on the website, we will send you an email with a form which you may choose to sign or to not to sign. So in case anyone is a little bit uncomfortable in the presence of cameras, just let us know. Thank you.
Please sit. I'm going to just stand here. So welcome everybody. I am Staszek Kistrin. My duty here is Vice Rectorship of the Jagiellonian University. My role is to care for the research and structural funds, as His Magnificence has appointed me to, and put it into the name of my function as well. But, well, I am very proud and that you have chosen Jagiellonian University, and the organizers has well succeeded in bringing all the distinguished guests here. The subject you are going to discuss is vital for society, for the global society, for all of us simply. I would say I also tried to learn the title of the conference, and I can read it, but I would rephrase it in the way that it is that future meets past today. Because it's really so that we now possess immense possibilities of communicating. But, well, the question always remains whether we as people have grown up equally fast as our technology did. Well, that is also right place, I would say, well, modestly to meet, because Jagiellonian University is the past, and the modern room here is perhaps not the future. It is the today, but you will discuss the future. Well, I am simple physicist. Before becoming vice rector, I was a scientist, I was a physicist. I try to remember something from that. And you know, for instance, if we take internet, it was invented by physicists, for physicists originally, to enable fast exchange of some information and to store some important, for physicists, information. Nowadays, it's grown so vastly that we hardly can imagine what we can do with that. We can store valuable pieces of data, but they are immediately hidden by tons of mud, which, well, different people try to load to the repositories. We have engines which can search for information in seconds. We can communicate with virtually every corner of the world. But, well, do we understand with whom we communicate? Do we care for that? Or we are just collecting nicknames and, well, identifiers in our favorite communicator? So we have to think how these great tools and great possibilities can be really more deeply implemented into societies, how to enhance the pace in which ethics, norms are also adopted to the possibilities we have. Well, on the more for university-suited level, perhaps we should think whether the possibilities of virtual university, of e-platforms, of e-learning are great. I agree. They should supplement normal teaching, but should they completely replace the personal contact between master and student? That's personal contacts and, let's say, some sub-formal interaction which leads to stimulating new ideas. And I think that before we can trust all our networks that they will replace it, we should better quite deeply consider the questions whether we can really do it and whether we have grown up to do it now. Perhaps we should well, also try to find out how we should adopt ourselves to that fast-changing technologies. That is, I think, the role of universities, of outstanding specialists like yourself, to try to pose first questions, because I am not sure, as a simple physicist I say, whether all questions are stated rightly. And then when we have some set of questions, I am sure that the debate like today and tomorrow of this group of specialists can signpost some directions which we as society, as local society, as well global society should take, and to match technology to human abilities, because that's also important. So I want to stress, I am very happy that this debate takes part at the Jagiellonian University, and I wish you arriving at meaningful questions and at right answers. Thank you very much.
And so now we will hear from Christophe.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I am tremendously impressed by the volume and gravity of the research which the organizers of the conference brought together here in this room. Unfortunately, I had no opportunity yet to look into the content of it, so perhaps what I'm going to say is completely misplaced and arises from wrong reading of the interest of the participants. But my impression was, when I went through the titles of your contributions, that the attention of the conference is focused on two phenomena, or rather two ongoing processes, very important, both of them, to our contemporary life condition. One is diasporization of the planet, and the other is digitalization of interhuman communication. There are two processes going in parallel. They are intercrossing, they are interacting, but they are autonomous. They are autonomous in the sense that one does not determine the other. Particularly, we should be careful not to fall into the ambush into which quite a few observers have fallen, of going back to the idea of technological determinism. Or whatever happens today is caused by the qualities of computers, digital communication, gadgets like mobile telephones, iPads, iPods, iPhones. How many eyes we will still see, it's open to guessing. It's not one-sided determination. But on the other hand, remember what McLuhan said, no one really contested his statement until now, that the media are the messages. Media are messages, and they shape both the content of the message sent to the listeners as the way in which we absorb the message, retain it, and interpret. So there are two, I repeat, very important processes. I'll start with the first one, diasporization. Diasporization is not just people moving around and settling in our familiar places, settling where they were not before. Migration is a general feature, a necessary accompaniment of the processes of modernization. Massive migration, resettlement of great groups of people started with the beginning of the modern era and goes on since then. So apparently there is nothing new about diasporization, but what has actually happened in quite recent years, a few decades, last decades of the 20th century and what's going on now, is a quality change in the nature of human migration. Migration is perpetual, is inextricably related to the process of modernization. Because modernization consists in two things. One thing is order building, replacement of chaotic distribution of probabilities by something more orderly, more predictable, more trackable, so to speak. And the other process is the process of which we call economic progress. Now, both processes have one thing in common. They inevitably produce redundant people. Redundant from the point of view of the possibilities of locality in which, by accident of their biography, history, they were born and tried to establish their life. The limited capacity of the locality to absorb them, give them place in the order of things. And therefore they are forced, even if they stay put, they are forced to set on the move bodily to other places, unexplored, unfamiliar to most of them, where the chances of living seem to be more realistic, or simply readjust themselves to the changed situation of their surroundings without moving bodily even an inch. In other words, to put it in a nutshell, either they have to pack their belongings and move elsewhere, or they are simply deprived of their belongings and therefore they have to set in move their way of life. Migration, as I said, is therefore inevitable consequence of modernity, for two reasons. First reason, as I mentioned it, is order building. When you build an order, when you want to replace the state of affairs with another model of order, inevitably some people will not fit the coming shape of things, and therefore have to be eliminated, or they try to remove themselves from the area no longer hospitable to their sojourn. Economic progress means, in the nutshell, doing things which were done before with less costs and less labor than before. That is what we call roughly economic progress. And it's easy to see that in both cases, in order building and in economic progress, production of redundant people, redundant in this limited sense, which I mentioned, is inevitable. It started, as I already mentioned, with the beginning of modernity, allegedly, according to differing estimates, something between 40 and 60 million of our ancestors from England, Scotland, Ireland, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, Poland, Russia, emigrated to faraway lands. It was a relatively easy thing for them to do, simply because at that time, European continent was the only little part of Europe, of the planet, which already modernized. The only one producing redundant people. In traditional peasant society, as you know, there are no redundant people. However many children are born in a peasant family, there's always a room for them to, a role for them to play, either in the farmyard or in the stable or in the field, and also there is for them place around the family table and a spoon with which to drive, to pull food from the common offer, from the joint offer. According to some economists, there were in Poland, before the Second World War, there were 8 million hidden hidden unemployed. That simply means that because they were inserted in the countryside, in an agricultural environment, they were hidden unemployed. But there, virtually, if there was the open access to the labor market and thriving labor market, developing industry like in west of Europe and so on, immediately it would become clear that people will emerge from this countryside, try to find employment in rising cities. And then there would be 8 million people who would like, under that conditions, would like to leave the countryside and move to the cities. Anyway, migration is not a new phenomenon. It changed direction now. It is not Europe which exports its redundant population to the other parts of the globe because it lost monopoly of modernization. Today, every corner of the globe produces its own redundant people because of the final triumph of our European, invented in Europe, modern way of life. Every country in the world, with very, very few exceptions, modernizes. Therefore, everywhere, some people are set into motion and forced to try to re-establish their way of living elsewhere. With one very big difference, of course, that unlike in the 19th century, there are no man's land anywhere left on the globe. So if Europe, when it was in this sort of a trouble, could find a global solution to locally produced problem, and it did find it in the form of imperialism and colonization, contemporary London people don't have this opportunity. They are forced to look for the local solutions to globally produced problems, which is much more difficult than the first task was. Diasporization differs from just migration in quality, I said. To put it really in the center of the issue, the differences between people cohabiting the same territory, which are always the product of migration, became recently, quite recently, became for the first time irremovable and also much more dense than before. Density is a very simple problem. In every big city today, not only in Europe but on other continents as well, is an archipelago of diasporas, of people of different faiths, religious faiths, different ethnic groups, different cultural luggage, different tradition, and different attitude to life, different style of life. Allegedly in London, for example, there are 70 different diasporas living in a close proximity to each other. Diasporas linguistical, religious, ethnic, and whatever else you can find. And there are streets in London where you can have Catholic church and Protestant church and some sectarian little chapels and mosques and synagogues all in one street. Now, it never happened before. If incoming people to a country were really strange, were unlike us, unlike the hosts in their country of arrival, they were expected to assimilate, accommodate, adapt to our way of life. Differences between people were considered to be temporary irritants. Temporary irritants. They will go away. When I was a young student, I remember each virtually or every second study in anthropology appeared contained in its title words like assimilation, adaptation, accommodation. There was a common view that that's the future. Therefore, why should we worry with the art of living with difference? If difference is a transitory phenomenon, a transient phenomenon, it now comes, tomorrow it will disappear. What we should concentrate on is how to speed up the inevitable melting of the pot, inevitable assimilation of the strangers to our conditions. This is no longer the case. I don't know whether you share my impression when browsing through anthropological journals. Recently, I can hardly find the terms like assimilation, adaptation, accommodation. They fell out of fashion. No one really believes that it's on the cards. So that's a totally new situation. Why totally? Because we realize, even if you resent the prospect, we realize that the living in presence of strangers is a permanent phenomenon. It is not going to go away. Probably till the end of our life, we will be living in close proximity to them. Therefore, living with them in such a long perspective requires a very substantial rethinking and rearming, so to speak, acquiring new methods of cohabitation, new methods of dialogue, which previously were not really seriously thought about. One would say that if in the former period, the former part of modernity, the rule was the overlapping of physical proximity with spiritual proximity. If there was no spiritual proximity, then physical proximity immediately followed. Today, the overlapping does not exist any longer. There are two independent aspects of our existence. So that is the question of density and durability, closeness to the stranger, and the prospect of the presence of the neighborhood of strangers remaining part of our life condition forever. Now, ladies and gentlemen, strangers are dangerous. Strangers are dangerous because, well, we know more or less what to do when we encounter a friend, and we know very well to do when we encounter an enemy. I don't have to explain, you know very well what to do in such cases. What to do when we encounter a stranger, it's a much more complex phenomenon, because we don't know how to decipher his gestures or her gestures, her behavior, her intentions. Are they benevolent? Are they sympathetic? Do they, like us, want to help? Or on the contrary, are they conspiring, making plots and preparing something awful? This is, by the very idea of stranger, irresolvable issue. And because it is irresolvable issue, it puts us in a permanent condition of ambiguity, ambivalence, cognitive dissonance, mutually inconsistent judgments which we pass, and altogether that creates the situation of anxiety and uncertainty. And who likes anxiety and uncertainty? Raise your hands. Go on. So I am afraid that the problems created by passage from the old-fashioned migration to contemporary diasporization, making the mixture of spiritual identities virtually permanent, it has disturbing effects. I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the effects are twofold. They are not just like the phenomenon itself. They are not eindeutig, as the Germans would say. They are ambivalent. On the one hand, you have the feeling of mixophobia. You feel some underneath, somewhere inside you, even if you don't articulate it clearly, some anxiety, some fear when you are surrounded by strangers. On the other hand, there is the other feeling, which is also promoted by this variety of surrounding, and that is mixophilia, because the presence of strangers is a vague promise of something novel, something interesting, something beneficial, something which you never experienced before. In other words, some fun. Karl Marx was famous for saying that speaking about idiotism of country life. Why idiotism of country life? Because in country life you know everybody who is on the street. There are no surprises, nothing new happens, and slowly your curiosity in life, in the world collapses. You forget how to communicate with strangers, and so on and so on. City is not like that. City, precisely because the profusion of strange things, strange people, behaving differently, presenting something new and familiar to you, is very attractive. Is very attractive to people, in parallel with causing anxieties and fears which in country life are not very, very common. Cities today, ladies and gentlemen, because of the process of diasporization, became at the same time dustbins for the problems created globally. Migration is a problem created globally. No one invites strangers to London, Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt. They are pushed to come there, and willy-nilly they are accommodated somehow where they have arrived. So globally produced problems are thrown down to the cities, to the local population, to the magistrates, to the president of the city, or whoever, the council of elders, whoever rules the life in the city, for them to resolve it. Problems are of foreign origin, but they need to be locally resolved. Well, so apart from being a dustbin for globally produced problems, cities are also laboratories in which people the hard way try to learn the very difficult art how to resolve them. They experiment with new methods, how to put people in a situation in which they engage in a friendly dialogue rather than fighting each other. A laboratory for perhaps resolution of the global problems. They are much more favorable for the job than, say, Huntington abstract theory of the clash of civilization. Because the foreigners, the strangers, the aliens around you slowly stop becoming just specimens of mysterious foreign civilization, but they become neighbors or workmates. They are judged not by to what civilization they abstractly belong, but they are judged like all your neighbors are judged, by the fact whether they are nice neighbor or very unpleasant neighbor, noisy or quiet, whether they are good husbands to their wives or very cruel, whether they are caring father or uncaring fathers, whether they are trustworthy or on the contrary potential thieves. Well, they are put in normal, handleable human categories of valuation. And in the long term, probably, that is the great role which the mixture, the closeness of diasporas may play, may implement. I send you to the famous recipe given by Hans Maria Gadamer to the possibility of people of different origin living together. His formula was very simple: fusion of horizons. Fusion of horizons. People sharing in the same kind of activity, sending their children to the same schools, working in the same factory or in the same office or in the same faculty of the university, and communicate within categories of belonging which override, in a sense, the divisions between categories to which they have been assigned. Or remember what Hannah Arendt said about Gottlob Ephraim Lessing, a great German philosopher of enlightenment. Hannah Arendt, in very flowery words, praised Lessing for not only for being the only virtually philosopher of enlightenment who dared to say that differences between people are not temporary irritant, but that they are to be with us forever. People will always be different. Humanity will always be variegated. All the rest of philosophers of enlightenment, as you very well know, predicted that at some point we will be all uniform. There are universal values, universal ethics, universal way of life. Slowly but steadily, everybody will admit that and accept it. Lessing said, no, that's not a prospect, that's unlikely to happen. Differences will be as long existing as humanity. But Hannah Arendt praised Lessing not only by this courage to say that, but also by the fact that he, instead of being worried by this prospect, he was rejoicing. How nice, he said, how wonderful. Thanks to that, we are doomed, we are condemned to creativity. Because the natural habitat of creation is variety. And most recent example, which I would like to add to what I already said, to Lessing and Gadamer, is Richard Sennett. Very much our colleague, still alive, and fortunately, and writing new books. And he recently suggested tripartite formula of getting out of trouble in the case of engaging in dialogue with people of different point of view, not only people who agree with you, but also people who hold to ideas which you hate. That is the real dialogue. Dialogue doesn't know this distinction. Formula of Richard Sennett is tripartite, as I said. It says informal open cooperation. Informal open cooperation. Each one of the 3 points is very important. Informal means you don't set the rules of proceeding in advance. You enter really into completely informal interchange. You wait until the rules of your mutual communication, your contact, your dialogue, will emerge in the process of this interaction. You don't impose in advance to other people who join you the rules of behavior or proceeding. The second is openness, and openness means that you are open to the possibility that your ideas with which you enter the dialogue may be wrong, or that they may be less attractive, less convincing, less trustworthy than the views presented by somebody else. In other words, unlike most of us, university teachers, you enter the dialogue not convinced that you are right and they are still ignorant and need to learn from you, but you enter the interaction in the double role of teacher and disciple. You expect to learn something new. And that's very difficult art, particularly for us trained as teachers, professional teachers. We need to be at the same time disciples. Listen carefully. Who knows, perhaps there is something in their own experience, in their own thinking, which I missed. And therefore I can actually benefit from it. And that leads us to the third element in the formula, which is interaction, or rather cooperation. Cooperation. Not simply discussion, not simply debate, not simply dialogue, but cooperation. And cooperation differs from the normal dialogue. Normal dialogues are initiated in order to convince the other that I am right and they are wrong. But cooperation is entered with the hope that there will be no winners and no defeated. Everybody will emerge from this cooperation richer than before. Well, so there are two levels of communication, two levels of dialogue, which one level, a lower level, is the need, produces the need to learn the art of living together with strangers, with others, despite the differences between us. The higher level, the second level, means produces the demand to learn the art of living beneficially together for both sides, not despite differences, but thanks to differences. Thanks to differences. Because the presence of different points of view actually enriches every participant of the cooperation. To finish it, and not to steal your time, which will be much more fruitfully dedicated to presenting your findings, I would like to say a few words about the second focal problem in this conference, which is digitalization of communication. Well, ladies and gentlemen, whenever a great new technological phenomenon appeared, like Trojan horse, for example, or the inventions which emerged in the course of 17th and 18th century, there were always two kinds of reactions to it. One was the reaction described by Homer in Iliad, Cassandra professing the apocalypse approaching. On the other hand, was a reaction summed up by Voltaire in his character of Pangloss, the professor, who could explain every evil as a step forward in the unending progress of humanity. We are very much in the same situation now with the appearance of digital communication and cropping up with enormous speed ever new, ever more convenient, more comfortable, quicker gadgets which enable us to use it. To paraphrase the widespread English concept, one may say that this case, however, is open but far from being shut. Far from being shut. It's open. It's open. It is a very short time we live in under the new conditions, and we don't know which way it will turn. After all, it is no more than technology. After all, this technology is used under conditions of diasporization of the planet, ossification, so to speak, making permanent differentiation between people, new differences, new divisions emerging all the time. So how we will be using these new technological possibilities under these new social conditions? That's the big question and the big unknown. Leszek Kołakowski is remembered to say that futurology is one of the greatest frauds of them all, because history doesn't exist by definition. History, when history starts existing, it is no longer history. Future. Future doesn't exist by definition. If future starts existing, it is no longer future but the present. So the science of nothing is a fraud. That's what Leszek Kołakowski said, and I believe that he was absolutely right saying that. So playing prophets is very inadvisable, particularly when it comes to predicting human behavior. Well, to put it briefly, is digital communication help in overcoming the problems created by diasporization, or an obstacle? That's the question which intrigues me, and to which I don't have really convincing answer, and particularly answer which would be able to convince myself. Simply too little we know about it, and the signs for the time being are, to say the least, contradictory. We are living, all of you, the younger we are, well, I am at the oldest point, but the younger you descend from that point, the more so we are living divided by online world and offline world. And the two are very different worlds. They have different rules, different cognitive frames, different prescriptions for kind of behavior. How they interact, that also is an open question. This is an open question, but there are some disquieting signs. The digital communication provides the users with the opportunity not so much facing up to the differences and escaping their presence. As most of the research of actual users of internet communicate us, it is the question that people normally enter the websites which they like and avoid websites which would expose them to the views which they wouldn't find palatable. Which means that when you are entering online, And according to Reuters research, average human being, if there is such a thing, a statistical abstraction, but average human being spends 7.5 hours a day in the presence not of other people, but in the presence of screens, all sorts of screens. Even if you are among closest friends, you are also in the presence of the screens. Whenever you hear or feel the vibrating mobile in your pocket, you just break, just emigrate mentally, spiritually from the company and contact the screen. Now, the average person spends 7.5 hours, and young people allegedly, due to the developing art of multitasking, spend in fact 9 hours 20 minutes in this 7.5 hours of astronomical time. They spend 9 hours 20 minutes in the company of the screens. In that world, they can be this online world can be completely contradiction-free, completely variety-free. It could be communicated with people like me, with negligence towards everybody else. So different from walking through the street, or so different from sitting in a classroom in the university, and so different from, say, going to a factory and working in the same factory hall. There, in all such places, willy-nilly, not by your choice, by necessity of the circumstances, you are exposed to this variety. So you are, in a sense, forced to struggle to develop the art of being there and answering to the challenges which being there creates. But on internet, you can cut for yourself a niche. You can do it much better, much more effectively than people who pay over their nose to get flat in so-called gated communities with armed guards at the entry. You don't need armed guards, you just push the right kind of buttons and they do the job. You are in artificial world in which the problems of dialogue do not emerge. When you exchange Twitters or other messages with like-minded people, you are not in dialogue. You are just reiterating the same truth which you already accepted to the detriment of all other points of view. I repeat, controversy-free space. There is such a tendency. If this tendency prevails over the other possibility, the other possibility is becoming open-eyed to other alternatives, to people with different views, to the variety of answers to the same question, and so on. If this tendency towards creating controversy-free space in which you have no trouble because everybody you encounter there repeat exactly what you would like to say, to hear, and what you would yourself said, if it prevails, then it spells trouble for the prospect of peaceful cohabitation in a diasporized world. So, it's still, the scales are still in movement. We don't know where we will go, but consideration of direction in which the development of our users of new digital communication goes, I think should be our major concern in the coming studies. Thank you.
comments or questions on what Professor Bauman has said? None?
Well, it's very good. So clear. Sorry if I will be circling around because I'm hard of hearing.
Okay. Yes. No.
For everybody else.
Yes. At the beginning, well, towards the beginning, your very interesting, wonderful presentation, you mentioned the circumstance that people who are compelled to emigrate do so because they are unable to adapt to the new situation. But is it not the case also that talented people find new opportunities in this social context?
Well, I don't see a contradiction between the two things. Because the talented people who emigrate en masse say they prefer to be in Silicon Valley, if you are in informatics, than in, I don't know, Wawa or Krasnodar or Rzeszów or other places like that. So you are simply attracted again because your ambitions and your skills, your possibilities are greater than what the locality can offer you. So the situation is very much the same. Some people travel looking for bread and drinking water, which is for them survival, they consume survival. Others are traveling in order to find the most modern laboratory where they can implement the project. But the motives are very much the same. If Geneva is tremendous site of recently built was constructed in a very rich city in Europe, then probably the emigration of the intellectual and most creative people would be much less than stay at home. Question?
Yeah, question. Because what was really interesting for me, the professor mentioned that the problems that are created on a global level are left to be solved on the local level, like those people who come to the cities and becoming, problem for local governance. So what I'm wondering if, what is your opinion on the possibility of solving this problem, or in fact, elaborating those problems on the global level? Is it possible to create such a level of governance or decision making that could address those problems that really belongs to no one, in fact?
Yeah. Well, it's a very right question, but very difficult to answer, unfortunately. Indeed, I suggested to you in the course of what I was saying that the most dreadful, most demanding, most difficult problems of our time are globally created, not locally, but that we are in a position, all of us position, to find local solutions to globally produced problems. On the face of it, it is impossible task. It is really task defying logic. Solution to global problems could be only global. It can't be local. On the other hand, however, I wanted to give you a glimmer of hope that what we are doing on the spot is in fact a key, who knows, perhaps even the beginning of resolution of the global problems. Problems like those which have been represented by very influential, very famous Huntington book about clash of civilizations. He predicted a very, very gloomy future for us all, that the differences between Islam and Christianity, for example, cannot be overcome in any way. Yes, perhaps he was right in this respect, but is the future of humanity dependent on overcoming of differences between Islam and Christianity, or between Muslim and Christians? That's the problem. When they are living together, and we live together, and we do learn to live together. There are some humble signs of it. I always tell people of my own experience. I live in Leeds for 43 years now, and the windows of the home in which I live look at the street through which children return from the nearby secondary school. Whenever I am at home at time when the school lessons end and they are walking, I look through the window and I have already longitudinal study lasting 43 years, quite a long time, you know. It started 43 years ago. You know, the children very seldom walk together, they normally go in company, so there were groups of children going on the other side of my windows. 43 years ago, I couldn't find a single group which had mixed skin colors. They all were separated. There were black groups, there were brown groups, yellow groups, white groups. 43 years later, I eventually cannot find one uniformly skin color group. They're all mixed. They are mixed, which means probably that contemporary youngsters do not judge their colleagues in the class by the color of their skin, I suppose, but by whether they are nice fellows or boring fellows, you know, attractive or just, you know, repelling. Normal human criteria which we apply daily in relation to people around us. So something happened in the course of these 43 streets. I'm not sure about the parents of those children who walked on the other side of my window, because perhaps they didn't advance in this direction. But youngsters, clearly children of immigrants to Leeds, which grew up in neighboring streets, translated the abstract global problem into a practical, pragmatical problem of daily life. And I suspect that the future of humanity depends on what is going to happen precisely on this down level, in the grassroots level, in daily life. Daily life is key to the solution. I'm very glad to say that the Pope Francis insists on precisely that, on the daily life as being key to resolution of all human problems.
Is there still time, or should we?
Yeah, plenty of time.
You stay. I'll come.
All right. Thank you.
As you explain the sort of process of migration and diaspora, you tie it to modernity. And I wonder if diaspora isn't more primordial than modernity. In other words, if we look at one of the original stories of diaspora, the Tower of Babel, it's a very old story. And that diaspora may be a more primordial human condition as opposed to a effect of modernity.
Well, diaspora is a very old phenomenon, but not universal diasporization as today. Diaspora was a marginal phenomenon throughout history. There were Armenians who specialized in that, Jews, Lombardians, some, for one reason or another, I'm not a trained historian, I can't explain it, but for some reasons, some ethnicities were dispersed over the world, and that's the other aspect of diaspora. One is dispersion, but the other is perpetuation of identity, being somehow immune to the cross influences. As I said, it was a marginal phenomenon. Well, another phenomenon of diasporic, intrinsically diasporic population are Roma and Sinti, called gypsies. You know, they are also living at the same time in very many different countries, in very many different environments, cultural environments, and are equally resilient to the devastating impact of any of them. There were exceptions of the rule. There were exceptions of the rule. The history was, according to all accounts, the progress from nomadic way of life to settled way of life, sedentary way of life. That is anyway how it was represented. Now probably it is looks more doubtful than before, but nevertheless that was the widespread belief. Today, diasporization is daily bread. I repeat what I said before, there are 70 different diasporas living shoulder to shoulder in London alone. That's a situation in virtually every big city in Europe, in Asia particularly, and not to speak about America, South America, North America, which was probably pioneer in creating diasporas on the spot.
I would like to ask you for your opinion on something, if I may. To take the case study of London, the case of London, which you have mentioned. I know something about London. I come from there, and I've done a certain amount of sociology of London. And it looks to me like if you could identify one point at which this global problem has been solved locally, which is to say the producing of a genuinely multiculturalized or interculturalized cultural formations, I would posit that the most full realization of this in some senses has been what are called postcode gangs. Criminal gangs rooted in very small territories who are so interculturalized that they have produced their own dialect, fully formed dialect, out of dozens of languages and dialects. The problem with this is, I'm not sure what my question is. Do we assume, or do we hope, but do we assume in what you have said and the Richard Sennett way of thinking, that these solutions to global diasporization on the ground in everyday life have to be positive, have to be somehow politically acceptable to us, have to be good? Because I would posit that in the case of a city like London, the most completely formed interculturalized groups are people engaged in, it's a discussion, in kind of largely in criminal. The people that have produced, most obviously have produced a genuinely interculturalized social formation. What do we do with that problem?
Well, behind the genuinely intercultural, as you said, hides a concept which I personally don't respect very much, namely concept of hybridity. There will be, just before the Soviet Russia collapsed, there were two only theories about what the future of the divided world will be. Opinions voiced by the most qualified scientists in history. Why most qualified scientists in history? Because they were all working in Sovietology, and Sovietology was the best paid science in history of humanity. We are used to say that if only we were given bigger grants, then we will resolve all the unknown issues which remain in our discipline. Now they were the only science of which I heard, which was provided with limitless funds. If they wanted conference like that, not 50 people, but 500 or 5,000, no problem. If they wanted new chair, how many more you want, and so on and so on. And there were only two theories which they produced. One was the theory of, which is called by acronym in America, MAD, mutually assured destruction, MAD, mutually assured destruction. Well, the two arsenals of nuclear weapons will explode, and we will go all. We will stop worrying about problems altogether, right? And the other theory was the theory of convergence. And that's exactly what's repeated now in the theory of hybridity. I will learn from you, you will learn from me, we will all become like, very much like each other, and therefore there will be no longer controversy between us, there will be no occasion to quarrel. We will, whatever I say, you would accept, whatever you say, I will accept. End of all these, heart-rendering disagreements, conflicts, and so on. The first was utopia, as we all learned from later development of events, and the present one is utopia. And I'm still very much in favor of what Lessing was saying. No, he said that differences are here to stay, that humanity is by its nature differentiating, because when it resolves one disagreement, it immediately creates another. And secondly, he said, that is good, actually, because thanks to this differentiation, we are such a creative species, the most creative species of all in animal world. And I think that that is probably the prospect. So it is not a question that here, say, in Krakow or in Warsaw, even bigger city, or in London, yet bigger city, a universal recipe for overcoming differences will be designed. But what I'm implying, that locally we can't produce solutions to globally produce problems, but we can produce, design, experiment with, test, and use methods of dealing with those problems. And that's what's actually happening. And I think that once we learn these methods of dealing, of handling, of tackling those difficult problems, like those children unwillingly, unknowingly developed in 43 years in Leeds, then worrying about what is happening on the global scene, which, by the way, doesn't exist yet. We don't have any global equivalent of the means of collective action and human communication, which we developed, which not we, but our ancestors developed on the level of the nation state, which is territorially sovereign unit. We don't have equivalents up there. So it is only the single intellectuals who voice the fears, the anxieties, or hopes about the global scene. Practically, global scene is, to this very moment, is something akin to Wild West situation, which you know all from Westerns, Hollywood-produced Westerns. That there are places in which the stronger fist decides, and a place which is visited by the itinerant judges very seldom, once a year, and even then they are hiding from pistols.
I wonder if anybody has any comments or questions about what Professor Bauman said about digitalization, since we have been talking about diasporization.
So I'm very, very interested in what you said about a kind of description or another way of thinking about online activity as a form of kind of migration. But what's of course very disturbing, maybe very depressing, is that our online activity is a kind of migration to a controversies-free space, as you said. And this is very discouraging, I think. And I wonder if we might think about or explain that form of migration in terms of privilege and power, especially in terms of the digital divide. Because for most of those people who are wired, who are online, who have access, that's one of the latest statistics, is that 9 or 10% maybe of the global population. So there's a very small amount of humanity that has the privilege of migrating to the controversy-free zone. And those migrants are, of course, completely different with respect to privilege and power than migrants who are guest workers or refugees or physical migrants, if you want to call it that way. And so I'd like to sort of maybe ask you if we could reflect on this difference, which to me seems a difference of privilege. And sadly, the position of privilege is to choose to migrate to the controversy-free space.
Thank you very much. I agree with that. I think that I mentioned it several years ago that mobility is the ability to be mobile is actually today the most important single stratifying factor. On the top are globetrotters. They were described as secession of the privilege. People who are free to move wherever they want, in every place in the world. There are what Augier called non-places, similar, identical Hilton hotels or Sheraton hotels, airports, which everywhere look the same, and so on and so on. They are, in a sense, extraterritorial. They have many homes in very many countries, and none of them they call their native home, the home to which they belong. Homes belong to them, not they to the homes. Top. And then when you go down, you end up slowly with the ordinary people who are rounded up and transported back to where they came from when they are knocking to inhospitable country which doesn't want to offer them water, drinking water, bread, and a place in school for their children. So it's true. It's true. The privilege is to be extraterritorial, not tied down to any circumstances. If in solid modernity the relationship between bosses and their employees was mutual, they were both dependent on each other. Workers of Henry Ford were dependent on Ford for their livelihood, but Ford was dependent on his workers for his wealth, and therefore they knew that they had to come together somehow, sit around the table, and elaborate some mutually agreeable modus co-vivendi. Now it is no longer like that, because the descendants of Henry Ford are no longer tied to Detroit, and therefore why Detroit became a host town recently. They can move their factories without any particular difficulty to Bangladesh or China or South Africa, wherever there is more agreeable local population, which is not going on strikes, which doesn't have trade unions, and governments which are more corruptible, therefore could pronounce make laws which are convenient and profitable and so on. So the mutual dependency was unilaterally broken. And that is the problem today, really. That's the problem today. People who are seeking the controversy-free zone on internet are forced to do so because they can't do it in practice. They can't simply buy tickets around the world trip and go from one Hilton to another, and be out of trouble. They can't. And that is the poor man equivalent of haute couture, so to speak, which is reserved for the privileged people.